Good morning to everyone joining, and welcome to the first webinar of the Chamber's Sustainable Business Series for 2022, sponsored by Aston University, the University of Birmingham and Shakespeare Martineau. This webinar will be looking at managing energy costs. As we're all acutely aware, the cost of energy has spiralled over the last year, and this webinar will look to provide insight into the reasons why, what regional government is doing to ensure a resilient energy market across the region, and practical measures businesses can take to help reduce their energy costs. We're delighted to have with us three exceptional speakers: Tom Pugh, UK economist at RSM, Cheryl Hiles, director at Energy Capital, and Serena Bacuzzi, who's the regional principal energy projects officer at Midlands Energy Hub. Please do put any questions that you have for our speakers as we go along in the chat. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the session. And we'll be taking audience questions during that. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Tom Pugh, UK economist at RSM, who'll be talking about the economic drivers behind the surge in energy prices, the government's response to the crisis, and the practical considerations for businesses in light of these developments. Over to you, Tom.
Great, thank you, Emily. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so you can all see that? Yeah, great, okay. So I'm going to talk about the economics of the energy crisis. And this is essentially what you would expect given textbook economics from an energy price shock. And a lot of this is exactly what we have seen over the last 6 months to a year. And we're really getting into the financial risk currency market bits now. So you get your initial energy price shock, which is was oil and natural gas prices. That pushes up inflation by a lot. In order to counteract that impact on inflation, monetary policy has to be restrictive. The combination of spending more money on energy and higher interest rates means spending and investment decreases. This leads to economic growth falling, the risk of a recession. The combination of all of these things increases the financial risk. You get a fall in the pound in this case, and that fall in the pound pushes up inflation, and the whole the risk is that the whole cycle starts again. So this is just energy prices. So if you think back to before the pandemic, you were paying £50 per megawatt hour. You're now paying 400. In the winter, the wholesale price could be up to 600. Obviously, the government's energy price cap means that households and businesses won't be paying that. But I think there's still three things worth thinking about when it comes to this chart. So the first is that even though energy prices have been capped, they're still significantly 2-3 times higher than they were this time last year. So the share of households income and the share of business costs going on energy is going to increase significantly. That's still going to have a dampening effect on consumer spending and business investment. Second is that gap between where those blue and green lines are and where that horizontal dashed line is has to be paid by the government. That's not just free energy. That's going to dramatically increase the government's budget deficit, and that has all sorts of ramifications for interest rates and the pound, as we're seeing over the last week or so. And the third is that even though households are protected for 2 years, businesses are only for 6 months. We don't really know what's going to happen after that 6 months. We don't know who's going to qualify as a vulnerable business, what kind of support they'll get. So it raises the spectre of a cliff edge. In 6 months' time, businesses could be looking at another massive jump in their energy costs. So the other question that I get asked a lot is, why are UK energy prices rising so much when we don't really get any energy from Russia? Well, it's really that LNG segment there, that 23% of UK natural gas. We compete with that basically on the open market. So if prices in Europe are extremely high. That feeds through into prices here, and we trade a lot of electricity and natural gas between Europe. So essentially, I think it's probably wrong to think about UK and Europe as separate markets. They are interconnected. So that's why, even though we only got something like 4% of energy from Russia, and now we get nothing, UK energy prices are still affected. So this is the impact on inflation of everything that we've just seen. Previously, we were expecting inflation to spike to kind of 15% in January. Now, thanks to the energy price cap, that will only be 11%, and it will fall down much more quickly, which is a good news kind of in the short term. The bad news is that by capping energy prices and by kind of injecting a massive fiscal stimulus through tax cuts, inflation in the medium term, so kind of from 2024 onwards, will remain higher than it would otherwise have done. And that has kind of the implication for interest rates. If inflation in the medium term is going to be higher, the Bank of England needs to lean against that more heavily. That's why we've seen financial market expectations for where interest rates are going to go effectively double, more than double, since August. So they're now kind of expecting interest rates to peak at, I've got 5.5% in this chart, but when I checked this morning, it's close to 6%. That will bring inflation down, but it will also cause a recession, house price falls, all of these kind of factors. I personally think it's a little bit unlikely that interest rates do go to 6% just because of the damage to small, medium-sized businesses and the housing market that will cause, but it's certainly not out of the realms of possibility. And then this is the impact, essentially, on the economy of kind of rising interest rates and rising inflation. I've picked retail sales just because it's so clear what's going on. So the value of retail sales, which is essentially all the money that you spend on clothes, food, etc. in the shops, has been rising pretty strongly. So if you're a retailer, you may have found that your turnover is growing pretty nicely. But the volume, so the amount of goods that you can buy for that money, has fallen quite sharply. And when we talk about the economy, we're almost always talking about the real numbers, so the volume of goods, services that are produced or sold in the economy. So this fall in this blue line indicates that the economy, if it's not already in recession, it probably is, it will be quite soon. So coming on to recession, the good news here is that the recession that we are probably already in is likely to be pretty small. That massive fiscal stimulus from the government in capping energy prices, cutting taxes, will mean that that drop in spending isn't as big as it otherwise would have been. A few months ago, we were talking about a recession kind of similar to the early 90s, 1975. So much, much smaller than it could possibly have been. The flip side is that my alarm bells are really ringing for kind of next winter, so this time next year, mainly because these massive rises in interest rates that we are likely to see over the kind of rest of this year take about a year before they really start to impact the economy. So we think rates by early next year will be 5%, potentially 6%. That will really start dragging the economy down from the middle of next year. And I think that opens us up to a reasonably big recession towards the end of next year. And because the government has already enacted such large fiscal stimulus, that headline, so the headroom that they have on fiscal policy is going to be almost non-existent, which means there's very little chance that the government will be able to kind of enact more fiscal stimulus to counteract the effects of the recession next year. So I'm sure everybody has seen what's been going on financial markets over the last few days, but actually the pound has been weakening against the dollar for the entire of this year, been relatively stable against the euro, because Europe and the UK, their economies have been much, much weaker than the USA. Dollar is strengthening, both both the pound and the euro have been weakening against the dollar. So until recently, the pound against the euro have been relatively stable. That's important because even though the dollar gets kind of all the media attention, for the UK economy, the exchange rate against the euro is actually more important. Now that kind of changed on Friday and going through this week with the announcement of the mini budget. And essentially the problem is the UK runs a massive current account deficit. So we buy a lot more from abroad than we export, and we use a lot of borrowing from foreign investors in order to finance that spending. Now that's fine in normal times because if you think the UK is relatively stable, it has low and stable inflation, economic growth is reasonably stable, we have confidence in the institutions, then investors see the UK as a reasonably good place to park their assets. What we've seen over the last week or so is what happens when international investors lose confidence. So the pound is the one that's got the most attention, but it's also, there's been a massive sell-off in gilt markets, there's been a big sell-off in equity markets. So it's really international investors fleeing all UK assets. And so currency markets are notoriously fickle. I may kind of live to regret this, but I suspect the pound is going to hit parity with the dollar at some point over the next month before it rebounds more strongly or rebounds more permanently when we get into the kind of budget in the next banking review meeting in November. I think that was pretty much all of my section. Sorry, that was very quick whistle through in 10 minutes, but we'll have Q&A to delve more deeply into anything that you're interested in.
Definitely. Thank you ever so much, Tom, for that very, very useful overview on the kind of economic context and the wider impact beyond just kind of the economic, the kind of shock to energy prices themselves. I'll now hand over to Cheryl Hiles, who is Director at Energy Capital, who'll be speaking about the work of Energy Capital in the region and the longer-term projects that Energy Capital and West Midlands Combined Authority will be working on to build energy resilience in the region.
Thanks very much, Emily, and hello everybody. There seems to be no end to the challenges that are facing our British businesses since I started this role as Director of Energy Capital. We've faced Brexit, COVID, and now the war that's stimulated, and obviously an energy crisis, which, as Thomas has explained, has turned into a cost of living crisis, and somehow, due to some decisions recently, has obviously escalated to a full-scale economic and financial crisis. So it's pretty hard to say what to do for businesses when you're asked kind of what can I do about energy in the current current challenges that everybody's facing. But I'll start by just telling you a little bit about who Energy Capital are and what we're trying to achieve. So we are a West Midlands-based energy partnership established to oversee the delivery of the 2018 Regional Energy Strategy that was produced. We're a unique partnership. We're the only one in the UK, and we're a public and private sector partnership. So we bring together both the public and private sector with the network operators who run our energy system, large energy users, innovators, academia, local authorities. And the partnership's been around for quite a while, since 2017, and all of those partners have been involved in the energy system for some time. I myself has worked in the energy sector for about 20 years now, primarily supporting places with their energy transition. So we've recently relaunched the Energy Capital Partnership actually to open it up to more representative bodies who are looking to engage with the sector, because obviously it's something now that more people are wanting to try and access expertise and work together. And we certainly know that it's not something that any one organisation can solve on their own. So collective action is kind of our key philosophy. So if anybody is interested in kind of finding out more about what we do, please just get in touch. Tackling energy costs is a core part of the regional energy strategy. Even back in 2017, the region had one of the highest fuel poverty levels, and it has done for a long time now. I'm absolutely terrified to see what the figures are going to be when they come out now, but it's been an enduring challenge for the West Midlands in particular. So working with our partners, primarily local authorities, Midlands Energy Hub, who you'll hear from, or sorry, Net Zero Hub, who you'll hear from in a minute, and suppliers across the region, we've been working to try and tackle fuel poverty. It's very much focused on bringing funding into the region and helping to target it to the right places where it's really needed. But energy costs have also been a huge challenge for our industrial base, as you can imagine, struggling to compete internationally with foreign companies who face much lower energy costs. And because of that, we've been working closely with the Black Country Consortium to try and share the learning from one of their base funded programs called Repowering the Black Country, which is focused on energy intensive manufacturing, our energy intensive manufacturing base. Because the recent crisis presents a fundamental threat to our manufacturing base, the Mayor's actually, with his support, just recently launched an industrial energy task force to try and take the actions that have been recommended by the Repowering the Black Country programme straight to government and try and address some of these things, both immediate and longer term actions, including sort of helping those businesses that haven't tackled energy yet to do energy audits to get to a position where they know what to do, but also looking at a fundamental restructure of our industrial base to see how we can support it going forward. So that's kind of either end of the spectrum. But alongside energy costs, decarbonisation has been a key aspect of our strategy and our work. Energy capital plays a particularly key role in between the end users and the public sector who are trying to decarbonise and the energy networks who invest in their infrastructures to facilitate that. So, for example, the electricity network that needs to make sure there is sufficient grid capacity for the electrification of both our heat and transport systems as they work to decarbonise, and other infrastructure such as heat networks and provision of those, or hydrogen infrastructure for industry and transport. So we try and play a role between those to make sure that the region's getting what it needs in order to facilitate decarbonisation. And that means working quite closely with the regulatory framework, because at the moment place doesn't really have a voice in that market. The energy market is very much a nationally focused market, and government and others don't really mind what happens where. That's not their key priority, but obviously from a place point of view it is our key priority. We want to make sure that our businesses can thrive, innovation can thrive, and our citizens can thrive in the region. So that's our focus. Obviously now we're in a position where energy costs are spreading and having a much bigger impact on the wider community. So you're probably all be thinking, well, we're not in a fuel poverty category, we don't do industrial, we don't work in the industrial space, so what's this got to do with us? So I'm sure Serena will explain a bit more about the fact that demand for help from SMEs and other businesses has risen really quickly recently, just at the point that we're seeing huge cuts in funding for the sorts of programs that are required to support businesses through this, as a result of Brexit and other government policy changes now coming into place. So that obviously causes a huge issue and kind of makes things like this really, really important in terms of sharing understanding and best practice. But for us, the solutions actually are still the same as they were before the energy crisis. The only real way that businesses can genuinely protect themselves from the volatility of international energy prices is to be able to generate their own renewable energy, which is grid connected, but that enables them essentially to reduce their demand and reduce what they draw off the network. Unfortunately, as Thomas explained, our energy prices in the UK are based on the wholesale price of oil and gas, not on a kind of if you buy renewable energy from a energy supplier, that doesn't mean to say that your prices are not going to be affected. It doesn't work like that. So it's only if you buy it directly from the generator, or you're supplying it yourself, where you can benefit from a more stable cost base. So for most businesses now, energy costs have become almost as important as staffing costs and logistics costs. So for us, that's really important, because it starts to become a locational issue. So it used to be that the Midlands was great from a transport perspective, right in the middle of the country, good provision of transport infrastructure. We had lots of great people, so that's all that mattered. But now, if you can't access the energy that you need at a cost that's affordable, it becomes a threat to our economy. So that's why it's so important. The basic energy efficiency measures really are the foundation of any action that business should be taking. And I think if people sort of say, oh, well, what help is there out there to take energy efficiency measures now? The response is likely to be, it's the right business decision to do that. So businesses are going to need to find a way of making those sorts of investments longer term. You're not going to see sort of small scale grants now, I don't think, for some of the basic things that just really should be business as usual. But there is also the opportunity that businesses have to, because they are half hourly metered, unlike what most of them are. So the bigger businesses will be half hourly metered, unlike domestic customers who normally will just have a single tariff, where if they move their demand, it doesn't make any difference. For businesses, you can seek to avoid peak times to try and draw power from the networks when the prices are lower. So prices tend to be lower when there's a wealth of renewable energy going onto the network. So when the wind's blowing, when the sun's out. And prices tend to be higher when there's peak demand. So between 5 and 7, when you've got that transition between businesses using energy and domestic customers using energy. So shifting your demand is also something that can be a really useful way of reducing cost. But in order to do that, again, you have to look at how you can store energy. You maybe need to look at some of the profiles of demand. Your profile of demand, how you might be able to shift that. It might be a lot easier for some businesses than others, but simple things like working practices can make quite a fundamental difference. It's just worth exploring now, I think. But the main opportunity really lies in the sort of development of on-site renewable energy generation, so solar on your roofs, that kind of thing, or a private wire agreement to a local renewable energy resource. So that's where you can agree a power purchase agreement that will set you a price, and that price remains stable. So that removes the price volatility that you can see by accessing energy directly from the grid at the moment. You will always need both, but it's about managing that energy. So I am actually quite keen to hear from people to know if there's any businesses sort of who are listening who would be interested in additional support to try and facilitate this. Because I know a lot of the big companies have already made this type of investment. If you talk to Severn Trent Water or organisations like that, they've made a lot of these investments already. It's something that they've been doing for a long time because they play an active role in the energy market, and it's something that SMEs haven't needed to do up until now. And it's certainly something that I'm sure they've got better things to be doing in terms of worrying about all of the other normal business, how do we survive day to day? I totally understand that, but some of these things now are coming to the fore, and I think are becoming a priority for businesses. So I would be really keen to understand from the audience whether the public sector can actually usefully bring forward some of these solutions and help overcome some of the barriers that businesses are facing. But generally, the key message from me is that energy cost management and decarbonisation are really fundamentally aligned and need to be the kind of foundation to any sustainable business going forward now. I'll stop there and look forward to the questions later.
Fantastic, thank you ever so much, Cheryl. That kind of like longer term almost perspective on how we can manage energy costs and become more sustainable, I suppose, as a region in the long term. I'm now going to hand over to Serena Bacuzzi, Regional Principal Energy Projects Officer at Midlands Energy Hub, to give some practical advice on how businesses can reduce their energy consumption and information on national and local support. Over to you, Serena.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you first of all for offering me the opportunity to attend and present at this webinar. I'm Serena Bacuzzi. I'm one of the regional energy project officers for the Midlands Net Zero Hub. I would like to start first of all, when I managed to deal with my slides, a brief overview about the Midlands Net Zero Hub. We are one of the 5 Net Zero Hub, previously known as Cheryl has mentioned, as energy hubs. And we've been introduced and funded by the Department of Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy base in 2018. Our role is mainly to support local decarbonization and clean growth, and to provide capacity and capability to local enterprise partnership and local authorities, but also the regional stakeholders, mainly to help them identify and deliver net zero projects locally. Nottingham City Council is the accountable body for the Midlands Net Zero Hub, and there is one regional energy project officer based in each of the 9 local enterprise partnership. So I'm here to represent the Greater Birmingham and Solihull LEP as well, because I'm the officer covering this area. Every energy or net zero hub in the UK is structured in a slightly different way, but we all share the same objectives. And these are mainly supporting the carbon reduction and local clean growth, and also increase the number, quality and scale of net zero projects, and enable local areas to attract that investment to grow. But also we are aiming to raise awareness opportunities and benefits of local energy investment, promote best practice across the region, and improve the local, regional and national communication channels, because we've got that sort of knowledge of local level, and we've got connection at regional and national level. We work very closely with the Energy Capital, in fact, to achieve these objectives and what was agreed in the energy strategy back in 2018. As we clearly outlined earlier, or Tom explained earlier, so the increase in energy prices having a massive impact on individuals and businesses alike. So here today, I would like to talk you through some tips on how to minimize energy consumption and cost in your business, and also to inform you about any support that is available both at a local level and national level. So these are the priority areas where you could focus on to reduce energy consumption and energy cost at the time where expenses outside the normal operational needs or operational cost must be trying to be contained. The first things to look at is how energy is used across buildings and activities, and what you can do to limit energy wastages. And setting clear targets and objectives and introducing new policies and procedures can help to control unnecessary use of waste or use of energy, sorry. And changing people behavior is also fairly important. You must get workers and employees that work for you on board with that, and ensure they understand the role they play in reducing energy consumption. And this can be done simply just using existing internal communication channels, or sort of channels that you've got already, and to try to bring your your staff on board. But also can be done through effective trainings and new awareness campaigns that can be specific for the business, but also you can use existing or wider sort of regional campaigns. Where possible, plant maintenance should look at investment aiming to improve the energy efficiency of buildings and machineries and office equipment as well. And this investment can be justified by the savings achieved through better energy management and improved energy conservation. So for some energy savings technologies like LED lighting, for example, the return on investment is normally fairly good and fairly short. So definitely is worth exploring these sooner rather than later to try to get the benefit as soon as possible. This is a list of practical actions that you can implement in your business, and that overall have been proven quite effective in for different types of businesses. So it's just some of the action. There is if I could put like a longer list as well, then we can stay here all day. But it's just I'm trying to kind of capture some of the most significant ones. As I said, introducing energy policy and energy awareness initiatives can ensure the effectiveness of other measures. Sometimes it can help sharing responsibility amongst different people, for example, by appointing a sustainability champion for each building or department or production line. This could also encourage employees to take more ownership of their actions and to understand the impact of their activities on the overall business costs. Monitoring energy consumption can help understand where energy is mostly used and promptly identifying any energy wastages or process inefficiencies. As a result, this will inform the identification of opportunities for improvement to reduce energy, and that could be kind of a long-term plan. Some good energy management practices that are included are, for example, defining the energy baseline of your buildings to start with, take regular meter readings, and for businesses that haven't got yet half-hourly meter and smart meters to try to get a better understanding about usage. But also carrying out regular energy walk around or internal auditing to spot as soon as possible any wastages. And obviously reviewing your energy contract. So you must understand how you're spending, how much you're spending, and try to look at all the time at best a more valuable sort of contracts, especially at this time. Obviously, there is quite of an alignment in terms of cost at the moment, but it is still good to just shop around even on energy contracts. And then, as Cheryl mentioned, shifting the demand side measure, you're looking at a demand side measure to reduce the use of energy at peak times. It can be quite important and definitely worth looking at. If there is some capital available, then investment in energy efficiency technology and on-site energy generation should be considered to benefit, maximize the benefit from that sort of stability of cost that Sharon was mentioning earlier. Help towards the cost of this measure, particularly energy efficiency measure, but also renewable, is available through different schemes, local schemes, not so many anymore, of which I will talk about shortly. But just before I move to the kind of local offer, I just wanted to remind you of the newly introduced energy bill relief scheme, which will apply from actually tomorrow. Under this scheme, wholesale prices are expected to be fixed for both for non-domestic energy consumers at around £211 per megawatt hours for electricity and £75 for gas. This is a new 6-month scheme, very short, is aimed to all UK businesses, and that includes also the voluntary and the public sector too. Just put a note there to say that if you don't have a smart meter or half-hourly meters, maybe it might be useful to take meter readings and keep, again, checking this consumption regularly and reporting to your energy supplier. So actually, they're not going to charge you on estimated user, but on actual usage. So this is the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund. Is actually more for a larger larger businesses. Is a national funding program and is designed to help, as I said, businesses with high energy consumption towards the cost of energy efficiency and low carbon technologies. The next round of phase 2, the autumn round, opens on the 10th of October, and there is grants toward the feasibility engineering studies, but also capital for deployment of technologies to reduce industrial energy consumption and achieve energy savings. Unlike the previous rounds, this one is open to all businesses of any sort of SIC codes, as long as they're registered, obviously, in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Here is kind of the local offer for schemes. There are different funding and support services available that depends on where your business is located. So I tried in this diagram to capture a little bit of the funding programs, which are still open or just about. Most of the schemes on these slides are actually funded by the European Regional Development Fund, and they normally offer free advice to SMEs on energy and environmental matters, and provide also small capital grants towards implementation of energy efficiency measure. As I only have 10 minutes for this presentation, I think I'm running out of time already, so I'm not going to cover all the details of this program, but I'm more than happy to obviously provide links and talk you offline where possible, or just, yeah, probably the easiest ways to provide links to these schemes where relevant. One of the schemes that I wanted to cover is the one run by the Greater Birmingham Solihull LEP. It's called the Clean Growth Programme. It's not funded by ERDF, but is fully funded by GBS LEP. The scheme offers capital grants of up to £10,000 towards the cost of installing energy saving measures for SMEs mainly, but only based in the Greater Birmingham Solihull LEP area. And it needs to be matched by 30% match provided by the business. So now the deadline for this scheme is actually today. However, applications are still being accepted and will be put on a reserve list. Obviously, if there is more funding available, there will be opportunity for you to follow up. And then there is a second phase where they will be looking more at providing help towards decarbonization plans and consultancy support and reports, and this phase of the grant is fully funded. So if this is of interest to you, the best thing is potentially just to keep an eye on the website I put on the slides, just to see how things are progressing and what is still available. Another scheme that's supported by the GBS LEP is the Zeller pilot. As part of the initiative, 100 businesses across the West Midlands will be granted a year's free access to the Zeller sustainability platform. This platform is designed to help businesses to take measurable energy savings and sustainability actions. Also provide access to sustainability services and low carbon products that are available in the region. I believe that you should be able to find more information, I think, through blogs as well that the Chamber is running about Zeller. But again, we can share more information on the back of this webinar. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, which is just offering additional support. But I thought I just mentioned that other than the grants, there is any sort of other support that could involve as well training and improving monitoring as well, other than obviously looking at how we can as businesses can finance renewable energy, installation of renewable energy. So I appreciate there is a lot of information to absorb here. The best way actually for you to find out more about any programs or support or grants that are running is to contact the Sustainability Services team at the Growth Hub. What we're trying to do is to try to capture all these offer in one place. So it's useful to have like a number to call for businesses just to help you navigate on this large amount of information and kind of target your help to your need, the help that you need to your specific business. And here you've got my contact details as well if needed. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you ever so much, Serena. That was a really, really useful overview of kind of practical tips to reduce energy usage and like you say, some of those grants, which I'm sure people will be checking out after the webinar, and if speakers are happy, we can send those slides out afterwards as well. And then you also mentioned the blogs that we're publishing, so the Sustainable Business Series that this is part of. It involves a whole host of events and webinars, but also digital content, so Q&As, recorded Q&As on our YouTube channel, blogs on the GBCC website, and all sorts of other hopefully very helpful materials. Thank you all, some really, really interesting insights there. I have some questions for each of you. I'm going to encourage people to put their questions in the chat as we head into the Q&A. But I have a couple written down to begin with, and I wanted to ask you first, Tom. We've obviously seen quite the reaction to the recent mini budget fiscal event, whatever we're calling it. How much of that do you think is potentially because of uncertainty and obviously the OBR not publishing their forecast following it? Do you think if there's talk of the OBR publishing that, do you think that might mitigate some of the impacts that we've seen?
Yeah, I think a large part of the market reaction is due to uncertainty and market perception. When we looked at the budget, it wasn't really the scale of the tax cuts that surprised us. A lot of it had been trailed in the kind of preceding weeks. They were a bit bigger than we expected, but not massively. It was more that there was no mention at all of medium-term fiscal sustainability. There was no mention of the OBR. There was nothing that kind of nothing to reassure markets that this government was taking the kind of medium-term public finances outlook into account or taking it seriously. And then when the Chancellor came out on Sunday and said something to the effect of markets always go up and down, we're not concerned about it, there are further tax cuts to come, I think financial markets then really did lose confidence and really did just think, this is going to mean inflation goes significantly higher, it's going to mean interest rates go significantly higher, and it's going to mean very subdued economic growth for the next 2 or 3 years. And that's what's really sparked the financial markets reaction. Now, you can make a very good argument that some of this is overdone. It probably is. Financial markets tend to swing very rapidly one way and then will swing the other way and find a balance. But I think it was not a surprise that we saw gilt yields surge and the pound fall, and I think there's probably worse to come before it gets better.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat, which I think is probably best answered by Serena. Someone's asked, are charities able to apply for the GBSLEP type grants?
If you're referring to the Clean Growth grant, the majority of the support and grants released by the LEP is targeted to small and medium enterprises, which is our mission, trying to support obviously the business during these challenges. I'm not excluding that obviously the services and support that the LEP is offering is available to obviously other organizations. So that would depend, I suppose, on the nature of the organization. So I wouldn't. The best approach is to contact the kind of email address or the numbers that I provided earlier in the slides, just to go through the detailed eligibility criteria for applying. But I would definitely suggest to kind of to look at the opportunities there through the LEP.
Emily, can I also suggest, perhaps from a charity point of view, I don't know if any of the charities are aware, there's a network called Fit for the Future, which is a national network, but is actually really useful for charities. It's a peer-to-peer network where they can share expertise. So it's a really good way of getting free advice to start with on a lot of these sorts of things. That might be worth exploring as well.
Definitely. Thank you ever so much, both. Cheryl, potentially a question, the question for everyone, but you mentioned energy poverty already being high in Greater Birmingham and the wider region. Why has this been kind of in previous years, and I suppose looking forward, bearing in mind that the pressures on businesses as well, how can kind of public sector, private sector, potentially a third sector work together to kind of support people through fuel poverty and the challenges that we're inevitably facing this winter?
Yeah, fuel poverty is a really big problem for the West Midlands, but there's two words to fuel poverty. There's the fuel and then there's the poverty. And I think one of the challenges is that the way in which fuel poverty has been addressed in the past has very much been from a energy measures perspective. So you can tell it's funded by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, the support. The funding comes through energy supply companies to help people in fuel poverty through the eco scheme. So it's very much about measures on properties, but actually when the work we've looked at has really explored why people are in fuel poverty, and it's not necessarily just, well, it definitely isn't just an energy issue. There are many reasons why people find themselves in a position where their energy bills are difficult to pay. There are often a lot of social reasons. There are wider environmental reasons why people are in those positions. And actually, it's what we've realized is you have to support the whole family and the whole home, not just look at the house and the property that people are living in. Our concern is obviously with the economic situation, even those people who are in work doing their best are also now still going to find themselves in a place where they've never been before. And I think somebody described the challenge of fuel poverty yesterday, where they explained that that one of their daughters got off the bus in a foreign country and they got off in the wrong place, and they said they realized they didn't know who to ask, what they didn't speak the language, so they didn't know how to ask, they didn't know where they were or where they wanted to get to. And I think people find themselves in fuel poverty a little bit in that position. They don't speak the language, and energy isn't an easy language to kind of get into if you're not used to it. People aren't used to finding themselves there, and they just don't know what to do. And I think that's why the support mechanisms that are unfortunately being pulled now because there's no funding, they're really needed, because people are in a position where they just aren't aware of how to get out of some of these problems. And you can pretty much guarantee if somebody is struggling from a fuel perspective, they're also struggling from a mortgage perspective or rent perspective, which now of course it's getting even worse. So we really realize you have to treat those situations as a whole, and that's what we're trying to do from a kind of West Midlands perspective. Look at all the different funding streams, all the different support providers that are available, and see how can we target support to those who most need it, but in a way that's holistic. And there's some great support agencies out there who know how to do that effectively, and we're trying to make sure that they have the capacity and the funding to be able to provide that sort of service.
Amazing, that's really encouraging, and I think it goes to what Tom was saying in his presentation about it's all interlinked. You know, we have a kind of a shock in energy prices, but that drives up inflation, drives down the value of the pound, you know, drives up interest rates and that sort of thing. So it's all like you say, interlinked. A question, I suppose, for the whole panel, and please, I encourage anyone to put their questions in the chat as we're going along. The current crisis, as we've kind of mentioned there, the impact on wider business costs, you know, whether it's staff costs as a result of what we've seen in the labour market since the advent of COVID, and to an extent in certain sectors since Brexit, you know, the impact on businesses of inflation and interest rates, all of the kind of ongoing impacts. What impact do you think this will have on longer term goals associated with reaching net zero in the region? You know, will some of those short-term measures from government to reduce energy costs be enough to free up some business investment in longer term renewable measures?
Do you want me to come in first on that one?
Yeah, you go ahead first if you want.
Thanks. It could go either way, I think it would be my answer at this stage. As I said before, the long-term solutions and the short-term solutions can and should be the same from an energy perspective. If we hadn't been so reliant on the global market on imports of energy, then we wouldn't be in quite such a sticky position as we are now. So government is very aware that energy security is a critical issue for them now, and are looking at their resources and what they have available. The problem is, as with everything, this requires investment, and it takes an investment in infrastructure takes a long time, whether that's a business trying to raise enough money to invest in infrastructure, their own kind of local infrastructure, or whether it's the grid investing in pipes and wires that enable offshore wind or whatever to be brought to people's homes and businesses. So the challenge we now face with the economic crisis is that investment just won't be enough or available, and in the meantime we're going to see huge economic challenges. So it's very frustrating that whilst interest rates were low and the economy was doing okay, we didn't see enough investment in our infrastructure, or and that's at every level. So we didn't see enough large scale investment going into offshore wind, etc. And we didn't see businesses really taking energy seriously and thinking about the future when they were able to. And now I think we really do face a challenge that we won't necessarily that we won't move as quickly as we need to, and there are going to be some casualties in that process, which is really worrying.
Thank you. Sorry, apologies for the flickering lights in this room. As I mentioned to speakers before the call, speaking of energy saving measures, we have motion sensor lights in the rooms, the meeting rooms at Chamber House. So if I don't move enough, the lights go off. Thank you, everyone. I'm conscious of time. If there are any final questions from the audience, please do let us know. But just a huge thank you to all of you who've participated in the webinar, and particularly to our speakers. We hope you've learned something that you can apply in your organisations that will help you in managing your energy costs and have a stronger understanding of the kind of longer term situation with regards to energy and the stability of the energy market. This webinar, as we mentioned earlier, is part of the Chamber's Sustainable Business Series for 2022, which features a whole range of events, webinars, blogs, Q&As, and a conference on the 2nd of November, all focused around sustainability in businesses. In the coming weeks, we'll have a range of webinars on topics including lowering your carbon footprint, delivering low carbon products and services, decarbonisation across key sectors, climate risk and adaptation and the role of businesses within that. And like I say, that Sustainable Business Conference on November 2nd, which will wrap up many of those themes and more, and have some fantastic speakers, including Andy Street, Mayor of the West Midlands. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, Aston University, the University of Birmingham and Shakespeare Martineau. The entirety of the Sustainable Business Series, the webinars, the events, all that digital content is free to access to anyone in the business community locally or more broadly. Thanks to their support. And we'd like to give a huge thank you as well to our brilliant speakers today for their insights. We will be sending out a very short survey after the event, which will help inform the Sustainable Business Series and the topics that we have going forward. And it will also ask some questions on sustainability within your business, and what your business is doing in this space to help support and inform our lobbying to help stakeholders and policymakers support your business during these challenging times. I'd say a huge thank you to Cheryl, Tom and Serena for joining us. And I hope to see you all at future Sustainable Business Series events.